Welcome. It's the dream of most business owners to sell their company for millions and to ride off into the sunset with a large bag of gold in their saddlebag. I suspect that's why you're here today. Sadly, this rarely happens because owners and their companies are not properly prepared for the sale. I've been on this exit journey many times with my own companies, and I can tell you from painful experience that it isn't easy. I made many mistakes along the way, leaving me with plenty of scar tissue. So let's stop you from making those same mistakes. This is Enhancing Clarity. Hi, I'm Philip de Lisle, and I'm now a professional mentor to business owners after a successful career of more than 20 years as a serial entrepreneur with 11 startups. I help owners like you grow your business by working on it rather than in it to increase shareholder value, often by several £1,000,000. My role is to clear away the weeds so that you can find your path. Since I retired over 20 years ago, I've delivered a series of lectures around the world on the trinity of buying, selling and investing in companies. This series of videos is distilled from my Exit Stage Left Smiling lecture about how to exit a company, which to many means selling it. As the lecture is about an hour long, I've broken it down into a playlist of 5 videos to make it easier for you to dip in and out. I've put a link to this playlist in the description box below, along with timelines for each video, so that you can revisit specific topics whenever you want. So how do you exit your company? Exiting a company is a complex process. My intention with this talk is to give you a flavour of what's involved, distilled from over 40 years' experience acquired from exiting 7 of my own companies, and more recently, helping clients do the same. Do keep in mind that your experience won't be exactly like mine, because no 2 deals are the same. But the points I want to share will, I hope, help you to be ready when the time comes. So in this talk, I'm going to cover the ways that you can exit, what professional advisors you might need, some things to think about before you start on this journey, give you a list of things you need to do beforehand, explain why culture is important in this process, give you some tips and tricks for the actual negotiation and some do's and don'ts, touch on the costs involved, and finally talk you through what happens after the deal is done. I wonder if it would surprise you to learn that there are 7 ways that you can leave your company. Some of these options are a lot more palatable than others. Sadly, one of these, and all too common in the SME space, is in a box when the owner dies. We all know the pressures that come with running a business, so perhaps this isn't so surprising. The next is liquidation, where a company stops trading for some reason. This is far and away the most common type of exit. A liquidation can be voluntary, i.e. your choice when you want to retire and there's no one to buy or take over your company, or compulsory, which happens when the company can't pay its bills. In the latter case, it's usually a creditor, and often the taxman, who applies to have the company shut down. In some countries, it's a criminal offence to trade whilst insolvent, so in the unlikely event that you find yourself in this position, do please take it seriously and get some advice. In any event, the liquidation option means that sadly you won't receive a penny for your company, so I recommend you start planning now how you can avoid it. Then there's a trade sale, when you sell your company to someone else, perhaps to a competitor or somebody in a complementary industry. This is the option, in my experience, most people immediately think of when considering their exit. They just want to sell up. But you could merge your company with another. In a sense, this is a mini trade sale. As a condition of the deal, particularly if you've got multiple shareholders, you might choose to leave the company and sell your shares while your other shareholders stay on. From your point of view, this can be as good an outcome as you would get from an outright trade sale. And then there's a partial exit, which often happens in mergers, where you take some money off the table for part of your shareholding, but you keep some shares in the new entity. This can be a very attractive option if you believe that the merged company has a bright future. I've known instances when shareholders have negotiated a trade sale, then before completion realised that they wanted to stay on post-deal, and so gave up some of the money owed to buy shares in the new venture. Next on the list is a management buyout or management buy-in. Some people might view these as different routes to exit, but in my opinion they're two sides of the same coin, so I treat them as one. Regardless, this is where a management team, either one that you've put together or one from outside the company, buys your shares, so allowing you to leave. This kind of deal is often backed by third parties such as angel investors or venture capital or private equity companies. We now come to the one which most people dream about, an IPO or an initial public offering. This means that your company floats on a stock exchange, and it's when you make some serious money. But it happens to very, very few of us, and today such flotations tend to be of companies with some sort of innovation, often internet-based, at their core. So if you're not in that space, this might not be an option that's available to you. Finally, you could just decide to retire but retain all or most of your shares. But in order for this to be a viable option, you'll need a ready replacement for yourself as CEO or managing director. This might mean promoting someone from within your existing management team or bringing in an outsider. Which neatly brings me on to succession planning. This is particularly relevant to family-run businesses, which probably constitute the majority of companies that are formed. For example, studies show that roughly 70% of all UK companies are family businesses. There's an old saying in the UK that family firms go from clogs to clogs in 3 generations, which is borne out by studies showing that this happens to 86% of family firms. But with the explosion of the internet, this failure rate seems to be getting quicker, which may be something you need to think about if you run a family business. It can be particularly difficult to choose who's going to replace you from among your family members if there's more than one candidate, which probably explains why family firms tend to have such a short lifespan. Before we leave this slide, there's something you need to be aware of. Not everyone actually chooses to exit, but can have one forced on them, the cause of a surprisingly high number of exits. I've already mentioned compulsory liquidation, but there are 3 other causes. Number 1 is that one of the shareholders gets divorced and needs to fund that divorce. Number 2, a shareholder dies and their family has to pay death taxes of some sort, which applies in many countries around the world. And finally, number 3, which is not dissimilar to number 2, where a shareholder needs to leave the company on health grounds. You're definitely going to need to get some professional help to do this successfully, if only to tidy up the business. Never forget that all exits are in effect beauty parades, and there are always a lot more sellers than there are buyers. And so as a consequence, you need to stand out from the crowd. I tried to sell my first business without any help, and I can tell you from painful experience that was a very bad decision on my part. So, the must-haves. All buyers are going to carry out due diligence on your company to satisfy themselves that everything is above board and as you say it is. If you're not familiar with the term, due diligence is when a potential buyer gets to look at your company from the inside out under a non-disclosure agreement to verify its value. You're definitely going to need lawyers because this transaction is contractual, and to make sure that the contracts you already have with your suppliers and possibly your clients are fit for purpose, as a buyer might be scared off if they're not. You're also going to need accountants to help you get your accounts in order and to explain everything to the buyer's accountants using language they both understand. If the deal needs funding, because it's an MBO or an MBI, bankers and corporate financiers may be needed. If you're going for an IPO, investment bankers will definitely be involved, if only to underwrite the flotation. Depending on your chosen exit route, you might want to consider hiring a company sales agent. As I said, there are more sellers than there are buyers, and getting a specialist to help you sell the business will definitely increase the odds of you being successful. And then you might want someone like myself, who's used to going through this exit process and who can really help you prepare the business for sale, because they understand what a buyer is looking for, particularly if, as in my case, they've bought more companies than they've sold. So let me offer you a few tips. It's really important that you choose the exit route, whether that's a trade sale, merger, flotation or whatever, before you hire the professionals. Select the professionals first, and it then turns out that they're not specialists in the route you choose, And you'll have wasted time and probably money engaging them and then letting them go. And you'll need to start the hiring process all over again, which is just wasteful. One thing I highly recommend is that you don't hire people just because you like them, although I accept that that does make for a better experience. Hire people that will get you what you need. Remember that pearls are created when a little bit of grit gets inside the oyster shell, so that little bit of grit can make for a successful working relationship. You want people who walk the walk, not talk the talk. Another thing to take into account is how to pay your professionals. I highly recommend that you do not pay by the hour, as this removes any incentive they have to get the deal over the line. In fact, just the opposite, as it's easy money for them. Most experienced M&A, that's mergers and acquisitions, professionals will expect to be paid a fixed fee for the job, normally a percentage of the final deal figure. You could argue that this runs the risk that they might try and pressure you into accepting a deal that might not be 100% right for you, but in my experience that never happens. Good professionals always want the best for you as their client. Their reputation depends on it. And speaking of M&A experience, I've known too many examples where sellers have hired their existing accountant and/or lawyer who have no experience of this kind of work, which can really make it difficult to get the final deal done. So please don't do it. Do your own due diligence early to make sure there are no nasty surprises for the buyers, but don't clean the company up too well. I always tell my clients that they need to kill the slugs but leave the snails. Why? Because if a company is too well organised, too well structured, too clean, a buyer won't be able to see how they can add value quickly. And if they can't see how they're going to add value quickly, the chances are that they'll walk away. I've known buyers walk away because they said they couldn't see how they could make their target company any better. So don't clean up yours too well.